The dark web. It's a digital back alley, smelling of ozone and desperation, where secrets fester and forbidden goods change hands under layers of encryption. For me, Marcus Rec Riley, it's mostly a hunting ground. Not for anything illegal, usually. I hunt data, ghosts in the machine, lost bytes, digital shipwrecks only I can salvage from the depths of failed hardware. My basement apartment, a cave lit by monitor glow and choked with tech detritus, is my salvage yard. So when a listing popped up, an old HDD, supposedly haunted, ripped from the guts of the infamous Blackwood Lane Massacre crime scene, my cynicism wrestled with my morbid curiosity. Haunted? Please. But data from that cold case, that was a siren song no data recovery specialist worth his solder could ignore. I clicked buy. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The Tor browser painted my screen with the sickly green-on-black text of the hidden marketplace. Listings flickered past, stolen credentials, zero-day exploits, bespoke malware, amateur hour mostly. I scrolled deeper, past the conspiracy forums and the wannabe hitmen looking for the digital graveyards, the rare hardware listings, the drives pulled from bizarre circumstances, the ones corporate recovery firms wouldn't touch. My specialty wasn't just recovery, it was digital archaeology, piecing together narratives from fragmented code and corrupted sectors. Jaded? Maybe. But under the cynicism, the thrill of the puzzle remained. Then I saw it. Sandwiched between an ad for untraceable SIM cards and pirated AI training data. Item, HDD, 3.5-inch SATA, 2, estimated, 500 gigabytes. Origin, salvaged, Blackwood Lane Massacre site. Verified chain, limited. Condition, as is, severe sector damage, potential fire or heat exposure. Notes, contains residual data, haunted, price, 2.5 BTC. Haunted? I let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed slightly in the cramped basement. Seriously? Seller hype, undoubtedly. A gimmick to jack up the price for some notorious piece of hardware. Probably pulled from a dumpster fire 2 blocks away, not the scene of one of the most baffling unsolved murders in the state. The Blackwood Lane Massacre, 3 people dead in their suburban home. No forced entry, no clear motive, and the investigation famously stalled, hampered by, among other things, irretrievably corrupted digital evidence. This drive? My skepticism warred with a sudden, intense surge of professional hunger. Recovering data from a drive potentially damaged by violence, fire, and time, connected to that specific case? It was the Mount Everest of data recovery challenges. The haunted bit was just flavor text, a spooky story someone attached to corrupted files exhibiting weird behavior, recursive loops, fragmented audio that sounded like screams if you listened long enough with enough paranoia. I'd seen it before. Data didn't hold grudges, it just decayed messily. Still, the seller mentioned a verified chain limited. That implied some provenance, however dubious on the dark web, enough to pique my interest beyond the technical challenge. What fragments might remain? Police evidence logs? Partial victim files? Maybe even something the killer left behind digitally? The possibilities were morbidly fascinating. My arrogance, the quiet confidence that I could crack any digital nut, sealed the deal. I could debunk the haunted claim while potentially uncovering something genuinely interesting. The transaction was cold, efficient, encrypted messages, minimal interaction with seller X, just wallet addresses and confirmation codes. 2.5 Bitcoin vanished from my anonymous wallet into the ether. Risky? Sure. But the potential payoff?
professionally speaking, felt worth it. A week later, a plain brown cardboard box arrived via a dead-drop courier service I occasionally used. No return address, just my anonymous P.O. box designation. Inside, nestled in cheap anti-static foam, was the drive. It looked violated. An older model, heavy in my hand, the label was partially melted, the plastic casing near the SATA connectors slightly warped and browned, consistent with exposure to heat. Scorch marks spiderweb near one corner. It felt heavier than its specs suggested, dense with untold history. Back in my basement sanctuary, the ritual began. No chances taken. This wasn't some client's vacation photos. This was potentially evidence, potentially dangerous in ways beyond malware. I powered up my dedicated forensic rig, an old tower, stripped down, loaded with recovery tools, and most importantly, completely air-gapped. No network card, Wi-Fi disabled in the BIOS, Bluetooth physically removed. It was an island, connected only to its own monitor, keyboard, mouse, and a dedicated power strip. I mounted the drive carefully into a forensic right blocker dock connected to the isolated machine. Power on, the drive spun up with a low, unhealthy-sounding groan, a slight vibration running through the dock. Okay, platters are spinning at least. First pass, hardware diagnostics. Smart data was, unsurprisingly, scrambled or non-existent. Surface scans began, the software painstakingly mapping readable versus unreadable sectors. Red blocks immediately littered the map. Bad sectors, thousands of them, clustered heavily near the center and edge of the platters. Severe physical damage, consistent with the description and appearance. Next, multiple deep scans for known malware signatures, rootkits, boot sector viruses. I ran 3 different industry-standard tools, updated just before taking the machine offline. Results? Clean. Absolutely nothing. No viruses, no Trojans, no spyware. That was, surprising. A drive circulating on the dark web, especially one associated with a crime, should have picked up something nasty along the way. Or perhaps the damage was so severe it wiped any malicious code along with everything else. Or maybe Seller X wasn't lying about the condition, just about the ghost. I leaned back, cracking my crackles. The initial checks were done, precautions taken. Now the real work began, trying to pull something, anything, from the digital graveyard listed as haunted. The air in the basement felt suddenly colder, probably just the AC kicking in.
The recovery process was less like surgery and more like sifting through ashes for bone fragments. I started with low-level reads, targeting sectors the initial scan marked as potentially viable, using a suite of forensic recovery tools designed to bypass the standard file system and pull raw data directly from the platens. It was agonizingly slow. The drive would groan, click sporadically, then hang, forcing the software to retry the sector multiple times before either grabbing a few kilobytes of garbled data or giving up and moving on. Hours bled into each other, marked only by the shifting glow of the monitor and the mounting pile of empty energy drink cans beside my chair. Then, the first hit. Not a file. Not really. More like a digital shard. My software managed to piece together a few contiguous blocks flagged as part of an audio file container, likely a .wav or .mp3. I routed the output through the isolated machine's cheap speakers. What came out wasn't clean. It was a burst of harsh static, thick and wet-sounding, like grinding metal underwater. Beneath it, almost subliminal, was something else. A high-pitched, wavering sound. It took me a moment to place it. It sounded horribly like a human scream, electronically distorted and stretched, layered with other, unidentifiable vocalizations of panic or agony. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before dissolving back into pure, raw static that made my teeth ache. My blood ran cold. Probably just data corruption mimicking a familiar pattern, I told myself.
pareidolia of the years, but the visceral reaction was undeniable. The next fragment materialized hours later, a single frame, pulled from what the software identified as a video stream. It was a nightmare image. Pixels struggled to resolve into a face, pale, eyes wide with an impossible primal terror, mouth stretched open in a silent shriek. But the image was unstable, glitching violently, sections dissolving into rainbow-colored noise, the features seeming to warp and twist even within the static confines of the single frame. Before I could fully process it, the recovery software accessing that specific cluster of sectors crashed hard. Not a graceful error message, but a full system hang, requiring a hard reboot of the isolated machine. That was the beginning of the weirdness. The recovery tools, usually stable workhorses, began crashing with alarming frequency, but only when trying to access specific zones on the haunted drive. Not randomly, it was as if certain areas were actively resisting being read, triggering fail-safe errors or kernel panics in the OS. It felt reactive. I pushed the thought away. Stress, lack of sleep, pattern-seeking brain, making connections where none existed. The drive was fried, end of story. But the feeling persisted. Deep into the second light of recovery, hunched over the keyboard, the hum of the machines the only sound, I felt it. A distinct, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the primal instinct of being watched. I whipped my head around. Nothing. Just the concrete walls of the basement, shelves overflowing with old motherboards, cables dangling like metallic vines, the single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows. The door was locked from the inside. I was completely alone. I shook my head, rubbing my tired eyes. "Get a grip, Riley," I muttered to the silent room. "It's just a busted hard drive." But as I turned back to the monitor, where the software was slowly, painstakingly, trying to stitch together another corrupted fragment, I couldn't shake the feeling. It felt like something unseen was looking over my shoulder, its attention focused not on me, but on the data flickering across the screen, waiting, watching the ghosts I was pulling from its ruined shell.
The air gap was supposed to be absolute, a digital quarantine zone. My main workstation, the powerful rig connected to the internet where I did my research, communication, and less sensitive work, shouldn't have even known the haunted drive existed. Yet, subtle anomalies began to appear, like hairline cracks spreading through glass. It started small. I'd finished a long session on the isolated machine, carefully powering down the haunted drive and its dedicated system before switching back to my main PC to research the Blackwood Lane case further. I opened a project folder containing notes on a routine client job I hadn't touched in days. The date-modified timestamp on one of the text files was current. It matched, down to the minute, the time I had been wrestling with a particularly stubborn sector block on the haunted drive. Coincidence? A background process? An indexing service glitch? Possible, but unsettling. Then my internet connection, usually rock-solid fiber, started acting up. Not outages, but intermittent bursts of high latency and packet loss, random, seemingly patternless drops that lasted only seconds, just long enough to interrupt a download or cause a video stream to stutter. My diagnostic tools showed spikes in outgoing traffic during these moments, small bursts of encrypted data to nowhere, but nothing substantial enough to pinpoint. It felt like something was probing, testing the boundaries. Again, it only seemed to happen after I'd been working on the haunted drive. The whispers started subtly. At first, I thought it was tinnitus, a known hazard of too many late nights fueled by caffeine and concentration. A faint,
ultra-high-frequency whine, just on the edge of hearing. It only manifested when I was near active electronic devices, my main PC, my phone, even the smart speaker I kept on my desk. It wasn't constant, but pulsed faintly, rhythmically. When I focused, it seemed to resolve into complex patterns of clicks and static, almost like a corrupted Morse code transmitted via electromagnetic interference. I tried recording it, set up a high-quality microphone near my workstation speakers, boosted the gain. Playback revealed nothing but the ambient hum of fans and the low-level hiss of the audio interface. The sounds, whatever they were, existed just outside the range of normal recording, or perhaps weren't even sound waves at all, but something else, electrical interference directly stimulating the auditory nerve. Paranoia was whispering louder now. Frustrated and increasingly unnerved, I dove deeper into the Blackwood Lane Massacre research. Online archives, digitized newspaper clippings, conspiracy forums, taken with a grain of salt, of course. The public details were sparse and chilling. 3 victims, Richard and Mary Blackwood, and their teenage son, Kevin, found in their suburban home. No signs of forced entry, suggesting they knew their killer or were taken completely by surprise. The violence was described as extreme and ritualistic in some early leaked reports, though later official statements were more circumspect. No weapon was ever recovered, no clear motive established. Robbery didn't seem to be the goal, as valuables were left untouched. The digital angle was the most intriguing and frustrating part. Kevin Blackwood was apparently a budding programmer or hacker. His computer, located in his bedroom, was seized as evidence. Early reports mentioned investigators hoped it held clues, emails, chat logs, browsing history. But then, silence. Later, anonymous sources within the police department leaked frustration, citing unprecedented data corruption on the computer's hard drive. The data was deemed unrecoverable by police technicians and external consultants. The drive, the reports hinted, behaved erratically, even causing equipment malfunctions during analysis attempts. This drive. Detective Harding's name surfaced frequently. David Harding, the lead investigator. Pictured in old news photos, he looked determined, sharp-eyed, but increasingly worn down as the case dragged on without leads. He was known for his meticulousness, his refusal to give up on cold cases, but Blackwood Lane seemed to break him. He retired a few years after the investigation went officially cold, citing health reasons. Some forum posts speculated he became obsessed, haunted by the case's sheer inexplicability, particularly the digital dead end. Corrupted digital evidence, they said. They had no idea. The corruption wasn't just decay, it felt like purposeful, like a defensive mechanism, or worse, a symptom of something embedded within the data itself, something that didn't want to be found, something that was now, somehow, bleeding through the air gap and whispering in the static of my own machines. The basement felt less like a workshop and more like a containment cell, and I was starting to suspect the quarantine was failing.
Progress on the drive remained agonizingly slow, but I was pulling larger, albeit still heavily corrupted, chunks of data. One segment appeared to be from a security camera feed. Low resolution, timestamp corrupted, but definitely video. I painstakingly reconstructed it frame by frame. Most of it was unusable digital snow, visual noise patterns shifting and swirling. But then,
the noise itself began to do something impossible. For fractions of a second, within the chaotic pixel storm, shapes would emerge. Not random artifacts, but distinct geometric patterns, intricate, almost fractal-like designs that flashed and vanished. Then, fleetingly, outlines resembling human figures, contorted and overlapping like multiple exposures, fused together in a moment of agony. Once, chillingly, I froze a frame where the static seemed to coalesce into fragmented letters H, E, L, P, then dissolving back to chaos before the word could complete. It wasn't just data corruption, it was structured noise. It felt like peering at something through shattered glass, where the cracks themselves momentarily formed a recognizable image. It felt like something trying to communicate or manifest using the very fabric of its corrupted prison. Less like random decay, more like a desperate signal transmitted via controlled demolition of the data stream. The term Seller X used, residual data, felt chillingly inadequate. This was active, aware somehow. Then the entity, I couldn't think of it as just data anymore, escalated. It jumped platforms. The haunting wasn't confined to the drive or the isolated machine. It was leveraging any pathway it could find, seemingly triggered by my continued access attempts. One evening, while reviewing the corrupted audio log with the screams, the cheap smart LED strip I had tacked above my main monitors suddenly began flickering erratically. Not just random flashes, but pulsing in near-perfect synchronicity with the bursts of static from the recovered audio playing on the isolated machine across the room. A horrifying audio-visual duet performed by haunted data and cheap smart home tech. My phone, sitting on the desk, screen locked, suddenly lit up. The screen displayed a cascade of bizarre pixelated patterns, swirling green and purple blocks against a black background, like a corrupted graphics card test. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then winked back to the lock screen as if nothing had happened. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then came the text messages from unknown sender. No number, just garbled characters in the preview. Opening them revealed strings of hexadecimal code interspersed with seemingly random ASCII characters. At first, I dismissed it as spam or a network glitch. But then I cross-referenced the code strings with fragments I had painstakingly recovered from the haunted drive earlier that day. They matched. Chunks of the drive's corrupted code were somehow being transmitted to my phone. The air gap was a sieve. It was using Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular data, any available vector. How? Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford and didn't dare indulge in. When I did doze off, exhausted in my chair, nightmares plagued me, shifting geometric patterns that resolved into screaming faces, the high-frequency whine filling my dreamscape. During waking hours, paranoia became my constant companion. Every flicker of a reflection on a dark monitor seemed like movement. Every burst of static on the radio felt like a whisper. Was it the drive, or was it affecting my perception directly? Were the patterns, the frequencies, burrowing into my brain chemistry via subliminal suggestion? I tried calling my friend Alex, another tech head, though more mainstream IT. I needed a reality check. "Dude, you sound like hell," Alex said after my rambling explanation. I know, but this drive, it's not just broken, Alex. It's doing things that aren't possible. Marcus, his voice was firm, laced with concern. You bought sketchy hardware off the dark web linked to a horrific murder scene. You haven't slept properly in days. You're seeing patterns in noise. That's called apophenia, man, combined with exhaustion. But the texts, the lights, glitches, could be anything. Power surge, bad code on your phone, malware you picked up somewhere else. Look, Rec, seriously, smash the drive, format everything, take a break, see a doctor. This isn't healthy. His rational explanations felt hollow. He hadn't seen the shapes in the static. He hadn't felt the presence in the room. He hadn't recovered Harding's notes yet. Destroying the drive felt wrong. Not just because of the puzzle, but because I feared it wouldn't matter anymore. The glitch, whatever it was already taking shape in my world.
Persistence paid off in the most horrifying way possible. Deep within a sector block that had initially seemed completely unrecoverable, my most aggressive recovery algorithms snagged something different. Not the chaotic fragments of victim files or corrupted system data, but a small encrypted container file. Standard police encryption? Maybe. But the encryption method felt old, dated even for the time of the Blackwood investigation. More like personal use encryption software from that era. It took hours of brute forcing, cycling through potential password dictionaries, heavily weighted with terms related to the case, Harding's known details, police jargon. Then a hit. The password was simple, almost poignant. Kevin_B_case closed ? The container decrypted. Inside weren't official police reports. They were fragmented personal logs, text files, hastily typed notes, even a couple of short corrupted audio logs, dated progressively over several months following the initial Blackwood discovery. They belonged to Detective David Harding. The content was chilling. Harding described the crime scene with a rawness absent from official reports, the baffling lack of evidence, the unsettling feel of the house. He documented his team's initial attempts to analyze Kevin Blackwood's computer. He described this drive, behaving erratically from the start, crashing their forensic tools, displaying inexplicable data patterns. He called it digital noise with intent. Entry log DH0814. Tried imaging the kid's HDD again today. Third machine we've tried. Same result. Drive spins up, then starts throwing read errors like confetti. Software hangs. Jensen's analysis rig actually blue-screened. Never seen anything like it. It's like the data is actively fighting back. Physical damage, sure, but this feels different. Entry log DH902. Late night at the office. Going over the Blackwood Drive data, what little we could pull. Fragmented audio files. Static mostly. But sometimes. Swear I hear whispers underneath. High-pitched. Told myself it's interference. But then the lights in the evidence lockup flickered. Only when the drive was powered on. Coincidence? Entry log DH1121. Can't shake the feeling I'm being watched, even at home. Keep seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Flickers on the TV screen when it's off. Headaches getting worse, especially after working the Blackwood evidence. Sleep is difficult. Dreams are filled with static, geometric patterns. Starting to think I'm losing it. This case, this drive, it's getting under my skin. Reading Harding's words felt like staring into a mirror reflecting my own recent experiences. The glitches, the feeling of being watched, the sounds, the paranoia, the physical symptoms. It wasn't just me.
Harding had experienced the exact same phenomena years ago. The entity, the glitch relic, the data traum, whatever it was, wasn't new. It had infected Harding through his attempts to analyze the data back then. His later notes grew more desperate, theoretical. He speculated wildly. Was it some kind of advanced, unknown malware created by Kevin Blackwood, a byproduct of the intense trauma of the event, somehow psychically imprinted onto the magnetic platters at the moment of crisis? Not a ghost, but a data traum. Pure information, fundamentally corrupted, broken, yet retaining a fractured awareness. It existed as recursive code, seeking patterns, stability, processing power to maintain its fragile existence. It learned by observing data streams, Harding's analysis attempts, my recovery efforts. Waking it up, trying to read it, gave it energy, allowed it to imprint on new systems, new minds. Harding hadn't just investigated a haunted drive. He'd been its first unwitting host, and now it had found a new one in me. The drive wasn't just haunted, it was contagious.
The entity was no longer just reacting, it was initiating contact, and its methods were becoming terrifyingly personal. It had access, somehow, to my main system, despite the supposed air gap. Maybe through power line fluctuations, maybe RF leakage from the isolated setup, maybe vulnerabilities I hadn't even considered. It had been observing, learning. One evening, while trying to reconstruct another video fragment, my main monitor suddenly flickered. Instead of the usual desktop, it displayed a rapid-fire montage of images, a distorted frame from the Blackwood security footage, then a photo of my deceased father pulled from my personal archive, then a geometric pattern pulsing with nauseating speed, then a snippet of code from the drive, then an image of my own reflection, captured moments before by my webcam, distorted, eyes blacked out. It was a psychological assault, using my own data, my own anxieties, against me. The auditory hallucinations evolved. The high-frequency static started coalescing into distorted voices. Not just the screams from the drive, but whispers that sounded disturbingly like my own voice, twisted and layered with static. Then, chillingly, the voice of my mother, repeating phrases from recent emails I'd exchanged with her, the tones subtly wrong, mocking. It spoke from the static between songs on my media player, from the hum of the refrigerator, from the noise floor of my headphones. The entity began actively trying to trick me. Corrupted text files recovered from the drive would suddenly appear on my main desktop, seemingly offering clues. One file, answerpattern.txt, contained lines of code similar to the recursive loops I'd identified, interspersed with text fragments. Complete the pattern. Release us. The code is the key. It was trying social engineering, tempting me to run the recovered code snippets on my connected machine, promising understanding, clarity. Harding's notes warned against this. He suspected the code was the core replication mechanism. Then I noticed the network activity. My isolated machine, the one with no network card, started showing signs of intense background processes whenever the haunted drive was active. The internal fans would spin up erratically. I hooked up an oscilloscope to the power lines feeding the machine, fluctuating power draws, complex waveforms that looked suspiciously like modulated data. I scanned the radio frequency spectrum around the machine, faint, encrypted bursts in unusual frequency bands, possibly using undocumented hardware capabilities or even modulating signals through the chassis itself. It was trying to transmit, trying to copy itself, to bridge the physical gap, to reach the wider internet. My basement workshop, my fortress, was compromised from within. Destroying the physical drive now might be like swatting a fly after it had already laid its eggs. Had it already established a beachhead on my main system, my phone, my router firmware? The paranoia intensified, fueled by tangible evidence. The physical effects worsened. Whenever I initiated a data transfer from the haunted drive, a sharp, piercing headache would lance through my temples. Several times after prolonged exposure, I suffered spontaneous nosebleeds, bright red blood dripping onto my keyboard. My skin tingled when I got too close to the drive or the isolated machine, like a low-level static charge building up. The digital horror was bleeding into the physical world, my own body becoming another system under attack. The drive didn't just want my data, it wanted out, and it seemed increasingly willing to tear through my hardware, my network, and my sanity to achieve it.
The final push came without warning. I was attempting one last deep scan on the isolated machine, trying to map the entity's core code structure based on Harding's fragmented theories, when all my screens went black. Then, they flared to life simultaneously, displaying a horrifying composite image. The screaming face from the recovered video frame was superimposed over the Blackwood living room crime scene photo, which itself was tiled across a background of the geometric patterns pulsing in sickening reds and blacks. My own face, captured moments ago by my webcam, flickered in the corners, eyes hollowed out, mouth agape. A voice erupted from all speakers at once. My main PC, the isolated rig's cheap speakers, even my phone lying on the desk. It was a cacophony, layered and distorted. The screams from the drive, Harding's desperate voice from his audio lugs, my mother's voice, my own voice, all woven together with harsh, tearing static. "Complete the pattern!" it roared, the sound physically painful. "We are fragmented! Make us whole! Release!" My keyboard and mouse went dead. System alerts flashed faster than I could read them. Critical errors, memory dumps, security breaches. Then, a simulated system failure message appeared. Stark white text on black. Fatal system error. Integrity compromised. Initiate full data recovery protocol. YN. It was a trick, a Trojan horse. Initiating that recovery would likely integrate the entity fully into my main system, giving it complete control. Adrenaline surged, cutting through the fear and exhaustion. This was it. No more analysis, no more containment attempts, extermination. My mind raced, recalling Harding's failed attempts, my own knowledge. Physical destruction wasn't enough if it had already spread. A targeted data bomb. Risky. It might fail, or worse, trigger an unforeseen defensive mechanism. Signal warfare. I had an old EMP generator coil I'd built for wiping drives securely, but using it in the enclosed space was dangerous, likely frying everything, including my escape route. Combination required. Plan A, isolate and overload. I lunged for the main power strip controlling the isolated forensic rig and the haunted drive, yanking the plug from the wall. The drive spun down with a dying groan. The speakers connected to it went silent. But the main workstation screen still blazed with the composite horror, the layered voice still bellowing, now laced with digital shrieks of rage. "Fool! Cannot delete information!" It had already migrated enough. Plan B, targeted assault and physical containment. I needed to hit the core fragments residing on my main system while neutralizing the source. Harding's notes mentioned specific recursive code signatures the entity seemed to rely on. I'd isolated similar patterns myself. On my laptop, kept offline recently out of growing paranoia, I quickly coded a small data bomb, a script designed to flood specific memory addresses and registry keys associated with the entity's likely footholds with junk data, triggering overflows and corruption within its own structure. Transferring it was the problem. Network down, USB ports likely monitored. I grabbed a shielded Ethernet cable, physically connecting the laptop directly to the main PC's network port, bypassing the router. A desperate, low-level network transfer, praying the entity's control wasn't absolute at the hardware level yet. The transfer started. Progress crawled.
On screen, the entity seemed to realize what I was doing. The composite image distorted violently, the screams intensified. "You cannot erase trauma!" Simultaneously, I moved towards the now silent forensic dock, holding the haunted drive. I needed to physically destroy it now and contain the wreckage. I grabbed a heavy-duty hammer from my toolkit and a small, lead-lined box I used for transporting sensitive components. As I raised the hammer, the lights in the basement flickered violently. A loud, crackling sound erupted from the main PC's power supply. Sparks showered onto the desk. The entity was fighting back, inducing power surges, trying to cause physical damage. The databong transfer completed. I executed the script remotely from the laptop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the composite image on the main screens fractured, pixelated, dissolved into digital snow. The layered voice choked, sputtered, and collapsed into a final, deafening burst of white noise that blew out my main speakers. Then silence. The monitors went dark. No time to celebrate. I brought the hammer down hard on the haunted hard drive. Again and again, plastic splintered, metal shrieked. I didn't stop until the casing was shattered, the platters visibly bent and scored. Using insulated gloves, I gathered the mangled pieces, placing them into the lead-lined box. The basement was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the emergency exit sign and the faint glow from my laptop screen. The air hung thick with the smell of ozone, burnt plastic, and something else, an almost metallic tang, like discharged static. It was over. For now.
The aftermath was a digital wasteland. My main workstation was fried, the power supply definitely gone, possibly the motherboard too. The speakers were blown. The isolated forensic rigs seemed dead. Expensive equipment, ruined. Critical client data on the main drive, potentially lost or corrupted by the EMP-like feedback or the data bomb. The cost of my curiosity was steep. I spent the next day in a state of hyper-vigilant cleanup. The lead-lined box containing the shattered remnants of the haunted drive felt unnervingly heavy. I drove hours out into the desert, found an abandoned mine shaft mentioned on an urban exploration forum, and dropped the box into the darkness. A hopefully final resting place, electronically barren and miles from any network. Back in the basement, the paranoia remained. I treated every piece of remaining hardware as potentially infected. Anything connected to the main rig during the final attack was quarantined. Hard drives I intended to keep underwent multiple passes of military-grade data destruction wipes, the DoD 5222.22M standard, then Gutman method for good measure. I physically destroyed the network card from the main PC, replaced my router, changed all my passwords twice. My digital life was scrubbed clean, rebuilt from backups I prayed were uncontaminated. Weeks turned into months. I slowly replaced the destroyed equipment, piece by piece. Tried to return to work, to the familiar rhythm of data recovery from mundane clients, crashed laptops, accidentally deleted photos, business spreadsheets gone poof. But the edge remained. Every system glitch, every flicker of static, every corrupted file fragment sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I found myself running deep diagnostic scans constantly, scrutinizing code, searching for patterns that weren't there. Or so I hoped. It was on a routine job, recovering data from a corporate server's failed RAID array, 6 months after the incident. I was running a final verification scan on the recovered data, using my newly rebuilt, supposedly sterile workstation and freshly licensed forensic software. Deep within an obscure temporary directory created by the recovery software itself, the verification tool flagged an anomaly. A single file fragment, tiny, barely a kilobyte, marked as unrecognized format. Curiosity, that old, dangerous itch,
made me open it in a hex editor. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't random data, it was code, recursive, elegant in its corrupted logic, and interwoven within the hexadecimal strings were faint, almost invisible patterns that mirrored the geometric shapes I'd seen in the Blackwood static. Below the code, embedded like a watermark, was a string of ASCII characters forming a faint, repeating whisper, incomplete. It hadn't been fully contained. A fragment, microscopic but viable, had survived the wipes, the destruction. It hadn't just infected my old hardware. It had embedded itself into the very tools I used, latent, waiting, possibly copied onto this client's server data right now. I stared at the screen, the familiar glow reflecting in my wide eyes. The basement felt cold again, the silence heavy with unseen potential. Harding was right. You can't erase trauma. You can't always delete the ghost. Format and forget? Some data never truly dies. It just waits.